In early 1958, cereal manufacturing company Kellogg's was interested in sponsoring a children's show for marketing purposes. Originally a part of a weekday lineup featuring programs aimed at kids such as Wild Bill Hickok, The Adventures of Superman, and rebroadcast Woody Woodpecker shorts. Joseph Barbera pitched the idea of a cartoon to Kellogg's executives through their ad agency Leo Burnett. After looking through the scripts and characters, they liked what they saw and bought it.
Yogi Bear is smarter than the average bear. Yogi Bear is always in the ranger's hair. The biggest show in town is Huckleberry Hound for all you guys and gals. Scooby, Scooby-Doo, looking for you. Scooby-Doo-Doo, where are ya? Flintstones, meet the Flintstones, have a Hanna-Barbera day all time.
The Huckleberry Hound show featured the antics of a slow-talking blue dog, known for his southern drawl and his off-key singing of Clementine, as he gets himself into the wacky situations in each episode. The show would have 3 different segments so that the show would be easier to script, and there are a lot more room for flexibility if ever the audience or sponsor disliked a particular segment. Huck was voiced by Daws Butler, who played a similar sounding character in several Tex Avery Droopy cartoons.
Anyway, Huckleberry Hound was more laconic and laid back, and I got the idea for him down in North Carolina, where my wife was from, Albemarle, North Carolina. And when I was in the Navy, I'd come home on a weekend with my little ditty bag to see her and hitchhike, you know. And so this fellow would be sitting on the front porch next door. He was a veterinarian, worked with her daddy as a veterinarian too. And he'd see me come in, you know, panting just to see Murtis. And he'd say, "Hi, Dawes, come on in and set yourself down. What's going on?" Anyway, it kind of stuck in my head, and I was in the Navy then, but I put him in a little separate box. I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then when Huckleberry Hound came up, there he was, you know.
Other segments of the show included Pixie and Dixie and Mr. Jinx, a continuation of the cat and the mouse concept about 2 mice and a dumb cat who hates them to pieces. And perhaps the most famous segment of the show, Yogi Bear, about a smarter than average bear and his sidekick Boo Boo, who steal picnic baskets trying to avoid the park ranger, Ranger Smith. This character would become just as popular as Huckleberry and become a superstar in his own right, spinning off into his own series in 1960, along with many follow-ups, merchandise, and becoming one of the studio's mascots. Since Kellogg sponsored the program, commercials were made to show the characters promoting the brand's various cereal products. These segments had noticeably more fluid animation as opposed to the actual show. The Huckleberry Hound show debuted in syndication in 1958 and became a surprise hit. Critics and audiences fell in love with the likable array of characters and the witty puns and humor, as well as being a breath of fresh air from all the Detective Private Eye TV shows debuted that season. And it was a hit in ratings.
I remember Time Magazine ran a big article on the Huckleberry Hound show. I mean, it was just, I bet the network just probably got ratings numbers like they'd never had before.
The show would pave the way for more funny animal Hanna-Barbera cartoons throughout the 60s, like the Quick Draw McGraw Show, the aforementioned Yogi Bear Show, Magilla Gorilla, and many others, as we'd be introduced to a wide variety of characters, like Hokey Wolf, who replaced the Yogi segment on Huckleberry Hound after he spun off to his own show, Snagglepuss, Yankee Doodle, Snooper and Blabber, and Augie Doggy and Doggy Daddy. While fan clubs and merchandise grew, on a night of the 1960 Emmy Awards, the show made history as the first ever animated series to win for Outstanding Children's Program, and made HB Enterprises, now Hanna-Barbera Productions, a household name, as well as the leader of television animation.
Barbera Hanna would look great on the top of the building.
You'd be my guest.
Oh, sure.
Now that they made their mark on syndication and Saturday mornings, there was one area of television Bill and Joe were dying to experiment with: prime time. When the Huckleberry Hound show debuted, Bill and Joe were shocked to learn that a large percent of the 16 million views the show had were adults and college students, and bars would frequently advertise the show during happy hour. According to Joe Barbera,
In one San Francisco bar favored by the college crowd, the barkeep would ring a bell at 6 in the evening when the show was aired and direct the patrons' attention to a sign that announced, "No tinkling of glasses or noise during the Huckleberry Hound show."
This persuaded the duo to create the very first original adult-oriented primetime animated sitcom, which of course became The Flintstones, a Stone Age take on a traditional family sitcom featuring cavemen, with a loudmouth but well-meaning Fred, his snarky but loving wife Wilma, his dopey best friend Barney Rubble, and his wife Betty. The idea of a primetime cartoon aimed at adults was unheard of at the time, and the road to make it happen was a long one. After all, this was the age of the Donna Reed Show, Red Skeleton, and General Electric Theater, not to mention CBS and NBC turning it down for being too oddball, too risky.
No one had even dared think about a Flintstone show. By that I mean a primetime animated show. Who could do that? I mean, how could you turn that out? A half hour a week? Are you kidding?
The concept of the show went through many changes throughout its development.
We had a hillbilly family we tried, a Roman family, a pilgrim family, Indian family. We finally got down to cave. When we got to cave, it was those things, like I said, Steinway piano that got your mind going. Also, you were able to take anything that was current and convert it to Stone Age. Like clothespins were birds with beaks that would open up and they would hold the laundry. A vacuum cleaner was a small mastodon. We would put wheels under him and his snout would pick up. That was our vacuum cleaner. And we never addressed any attention to it. We just threw those things in and the kids loved it. So it became that kind of a thing.
The show was originally called The Flagstones, until HBO was forced to change the name due to the threat of legal action of High and Lows creator Mort Walker, because the name sounded similar to his cartoon family, the Flagstones. A common trend of Hanna-Barbera cartoons was that their characters were spoofs of popular celebrities or TV shows at the time. Yogi Bear was based on comedian Art Carney, Snagglepuss was based on Bert Lahr, and the Hillbilly Bears was based on the Beverly Hillbillies. The Flintstones was no exception, as it was a send-up of the popular sitcom The Honeymooners. One of the people who took notice was Jackie Gleason. According to Marla Brooks, author of the book The American Family on Television,
Jackie's lawyers told him he could probably have the Flintstones cancelled if he wanted to, but in the same breath also asked, "Do you want to be known as the guy who yanked Fred Flintstone off the air? The guy who took away a show that so many kids love and so many of their parents love too?" Apparently, Jackie thought it over and decided to leave well enough alone.
Another influence on the Flintstones would arguably be the MGM cartoon The First Bad Man, directed by Tex Avery. The short, featuring a fictionalized version of Texas in 1 million BC, features similar designs and sight gags that will be seen on the Flintstones. Ed Benedict, who created the look of the Flintstones, as well as many other early HB cartoons, was also the layout artist of the short.
He had a kind of an abstract way of drawing, and it was perfect for this simplistic design style for TV animation.
But he had a real strong, flat UPA-like design style, which I think they felt would not only be simple to animate, but it was very bold. It had very, very strong outlines. It would read on TV sets no matter how bad the reception was. And he's a brilliant designer.
For the voices, HB would get radio and screen actor Alan Reed to voice Fred, Gene Vanderpool, whose previous role for Hanna-Barbera included the Winsome Witch, voiced Wilma. Man of 1,000 Voices Mel Blanc would do double duty as the voice of Barney Rubble and the Flintstones' pet Dino. And Petticoat Junction actress Bo Benaderet would voice Betty. According to Joe Barbera, selling the show proved to be no easy task.
I mean, here we are with a brand new thing that never been done before. An animated primetime show. So we developed 2 storyboards with Dan Gordon, whose picture I showed you. So now I go back to New York with this portfolio with 2 half-hour boards stacked in there and some other artwork. And we go along, I mean, and no one would even believe that you dared to suggest a thing like that. I mean, they looked at you as you were crazy. But slowly the word got out, because I used to do the presentation. but nobody bought it. I mean, you can go along and do this, which I did for 8 straight weeks. Pitch, 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 sometimes 5 a day. So finally, on the very last day, Leonard Goldenson, head of ABC, Danny Melnick, who was still around, and I think it was Tom Moore or Ollie Trays, showed up at the, I think it was my hotel, and bought the show in 15 minutes.
The show made its debut on ABC on September 1960 with the first episode, The Flintstone Flyer, and while critics weren't exactly kind to the show, with Variety calling it an ink and paint disaster, viewers made the show a surprise success, finishing the season at number 18 in overall Nielsen ratings, and giving ABC their bona fide hit that wasn't a Western. The Flintstones were memorable for breaking new ground in animation, such as the story arc of having Wilma be pregnant with Pebbles, who was originally Fred Jr., and the implied issue of infertility, which led to the Rubbles to adopt Bam Bam. Though because of this, the show became shifted more towards families than adults, and if that didn't drive the point home, the arrival of a new character towards the end of the show certainly did. The tiny space alien, the Great Gazoo, voiced by famed comedian Harvey Korman.
I was only about 13 of those episodes that had the Great Gazoo in it, and it was an enormously popular character. As a matter of fact, some years back, I traveled for Hanna-Barbera. They had these huge conventions and seminars where collectors collect cells. And the cells with the Great Gazoo on it are worth lots of money. And I never realized how, I can still get the little guy and people were, collectors, on eBay and stuff, and they want my autograph. And it was a very popular character, the Great Gazoo. I just made him sort of, dum-dum, very, superior and arrogant and elite.
The show lasted 6 years for 166 episodes and was the longest-running primetime animated series ever made, until 1997, when the Fox series The Simpsons broke the record and kept on going, and going, and going, and going. During and after the show's run, The Flintstones was a merchandising hit, selling everything from cigarettes, beer, vitamins, to even breakfast cereal that's still being sold to this day. Not to mention many of the toys and games. And Fred Flintstone would become the main mascot of Hanna-Barbera, Bill and Joe's Mickey Mouse. Starting in the 1970s, the show had a second life on Saturday mornings with many revivals, with the last series, Cave Kids, airing in 1996, as well as many primetime specials. The Flintstones also made many top greatest cartoon lists, and needless to say, it set the standard for many popular primetime adult cartoons to come. Today, not only is the Flintstones regarded as Hanna-Barbera's best work, it's important to television animation in general.
Really was the first time that everybody could admit that cartoons were for everybody.
Now you have shows, animated shows, that have the similar kind of loyalty to them. In that way, the Flintstones kind of set us on the trend that we're on now.
The success of the Flintstones and other shows made by HB will lead to more expanding the studio, as well as more crew members joining. Aside from former Warner Brothers storymen Warren Foster and Michael Maltese as head writers, and many of Bill and Joe's animators from MGM, new talent was brought in to keep up with the high demand, such as editor Joe Ruby and Ken Spears. Remember them, they'll be important later, and artists such as Don Luss, Bill Perez, Charles A. Nichols, former Warner Brothers and UPA artists Bob Singer and Jerry Eisenberg, son of MGM animator and comic artist Harvey Eisenberg. Another animator that would join the studio was a young Japanese man who worked at Disney as an assistant to the legendary Milt Kahl. He would go on to become one of the most prominent designers, and his name was Ibu Takamoto. Joe Barbera's daughter, Jane, would later join the studio as an ink and paint supervisor, eventually moving her way up to head of production, a position she held well into the 90s. They would also outgrow their old studio. In 1963, the crew moved to their new home at 3400 Cahuenga Boulevard in Studio City and remained there until 1997.
Well, this place is certainly busy. I understand you've been in your new studio only a couple of months, and already you're pushing the walls out.
We certainly are.
I guess you fellas have created more successful cartoon series for television than all other producers combined.
Sit down, George.
How do you account for it?
Well, George, since you ask a serious question, I'll try to give you a serious answer. You see, Bill and I believe in entertainment. We've never tried to preach in our pictures. We just try to project warmth and good feeling.
Our real stock in trade is wholesome fun, and for that we've found there is no age limit.
While many other cartoons came and went, such as the short-lived Top Cat, a primetime cartoon about a street-smart con artist cat, and his gang based upon a similar character played by comedian Phil Silvers, others made their debut, like the Jetsons. Similar to the Flintstones, it featured a family of the future, as introduced in a theme song: George Jetson, his boy Elroy, daughter Judy, and Jane his wife. The show gave the artists many opportunities to play around with many inventions and futuristic technology. Writer and designer Tony Benedict brought in a book called 1975, showing what new ideas and appliances would be available that year. The show debuted primetime on ABC in 1962 and became very popular with audiences, but had the misfortune of airing in a time slot against two bigger shows, CBS's Dennis the Menace and NBC's The Wonderful World of Disney. After its run, the show was stuck in reruns on Saturday morning from 1964 to 1983 on the Big Three networks, until being revived in 1987 for new episodes of syndication. Even though the Jetsons would reappear in the 80s, their caveman counterparts, the Flintstones, were far more popular. Recently, at an age where we're bombarded with clickbaity articles about the Simpsons predicting the future, one can argue that the Jetsons have predicted the future, as the technology seen in the cartoon has become our everyday devices, though sadly no flying car. Another cartoon in the 60s will make a bold departure from the funny animals and kid fare one would usually expect from Hanna-Barbera, and that show was Jonny Quest. This action series featured the globe-trotting adventures of an 11-year-old Jonny Quest, the son of brilliant scientist Dr. Benny Quest, as they travel the world with bodyguard Race Bannon, Johnny's best friend and adoptive brother Haji, and the Quest dog Bandit, as they battle villains all over the world, such as Dr. Zen. Hanna-Barbera originally wanted to make a show based upon a radio serial, Jack Armstrong All American Boy, but dropped the idea when they couldn't afford the rights. They approached New York comic book artist Doug Wildey to come up with an original action-adventure cartoon. Both men were impressed with Doug's work, particularly after he was able to show them that the comic book look was entirely producible for TV. The new show drew many inspirations from Jackie Cooper and Frank Darrow movies, comics such as Terry and the Pirates, as well as Joe Barbera's fascination with the James Bond movie, Dr. No. The show also went through many name changes, such as the saga of Chipaloo and Quest File 037, until finally settling on the adventures of Jonny Quest, Quest being a name he picked out of a phone book for its adventurous implications. Doug Wildey was involved in every aspect of Jonny Quest. He supervised the show, wrote most of the storylines, cast the voice actors, and designed the main cast, except for the dog Bandit, who was designed by Dick Bickenbach. Originally, he objected to the idea of Bandit because he felt he was too cartoony for the type of show they were going for, but the character remained the show's comic relief to offset the many villains, mummies, and robot spiders. The character Haji was also memorable, as it was the first time kids at home saw someone in a turban that wasn't a bad guy, and he was just as smart and capable as his white co-stars. I know that doesn't excuse the other racist stereotypes, but yeah. Much like the Jetsons, Jonny Quest was also known for using futuristic technology.
Doug specifically mentioned that he was always looking into the popular science magazines for hints of what might be, so he could adapt it into the Quest format of super high-tech mechanisms and vehicles that they would always have in those shows. Part of the fun for us kids was to see those kind of things.
Jonny Quest was a plethora of fantastic vehicles.
The VTOL jet, that was so cool at the time. I thought science fiction. I didn't think there was anything that was ever going to be like that.
Young Johnny was voiced by then 16-year-old actor Tim Matheson.
Jack Wormser Agency, they represented actors for commercials and some voiceovers. They had a kids division. Jack sent me over there to Hanna-Barbera to audition. I'd never done anything like that, and it was just a boom in and out. And one of those things that just went away. I'd totally forgotten about it. You just assume, well, I didn't get that, so that goes, and you just move on. And then got called in, come on in and do it. And then I got an insight into what an industry it was and the wonderful storied history of Joe Barbera and Bill Hanna and what their contribution and significance was in the animation world. And I got a real sense of how hard it was. You know, Dawes Butler, June Foray, Mel Blanc, Don Messick, Alan Freed, Mick Perrin, Olan Soule, all these people that I was working with, they were like the pros from Dover. You know, they were these people that had a set of skills that I just couldn't imagine. They'd be recording the Flintstones or the Jetsons. I'd sit and watch how they did it. Then I'd go in and do Johnny, and they were more cartoon characters. But we were characters based in reality.
Tim would go on to voice other HB leading kid heroes, while his most famous role later on would be in a John Landis hit comedy Animal House and in an NBC drama The West Wing. Haji was voiced by Danny Bravo, known for minor roles in films like The Magnificent Seven. Western star Mike Road provided the voice of Race Bannon, while John Stevenson was the original voice of Jonny Quest, before being replaced by Don Messick, who was also Bandit. The show's main villain, Dr. Zen, was voiced by Vic Perrin, who is best remembered as the control voice for the intro of The Outer Limits, while some additional voice talent were Kathy Lewis, who played Race Bannon's old girlfriend, Jade, and some of the minor characters and villains were provided by Doug Young, Key Luke, Sam Edwards, Jesse White, and Henry Corden, the second voice of Fred Flintstone.
This is Jonny Quest, where gripping adventure stories explode to life with blazing realism. Watch as full living animation makes possible a new kind of excitement never before seen on television. And it will happen every time you enter the incredible world of Jonny Quest, every week on ABC's Wide World of Entertainment.
Jonny Quest debuted September 18, 1964 on ABC in prime time, and it was a huge success. However, it only lasted one season. But why? Simply put, it was way over budget. Keep in mind the animation in the show was a real game changer, and no other action cartoon looked like this. And some of the animators at HB couldn't authentically draw or animate it in the old-fashioned comic style, according to Doug Wildey.
What I wanted was a moving comic strip with the blacks and shadow, and it became a matter of educating network people that creating and animating this kind of artwork didn't come cheap, because more artwork would be required and with much greater detail. These guys were used to drawing cartoon type characters, and they'd come in and they were at a loss. They couldn't handle adventure stuff. Boy, did I get calls at night from guys who somehow thought that they were failures simply because they couldn't handle something like this, which of course was crazy. But these guys would keep saying, I'm not really that much up on anatomy. I haven't had anatomy in quite a while. I can't seem to handle the artwork doesn't look right. And I'd look at it and say, yeah, it sure doesn't look right. It doesn't work. In the beginning, I was the only straight man in the entire organization that could draw a reasonably decent looking human figure.
Also during this time, the Flintstones were beginning to lose viewers to the Munsters, and rather than cancel the show, the network switched time slots with Jonny Quest, which led to the Flintstones airing on Thursday nights. Starting in 1967, the show would air reruns on Saturday mornings, where it reached a new audience and gained massive popularity. The characters will be brought back in a short-lived 80s revival and a gritty 90s reboot, The Real Adventures of Jonny Quest. In 2015, the Quest crew will make an appearance in the Tom and Jerry direct-to-video crossover film, Spy Quest. Despite its odd premise, the movie is pretty entertaining. It does a great job of bringing the world of Jonny Quest in the 21st century. In later years, Jonny Quest has been a major inspiration to most modern shows and movies. Director Brad Bird, a huge fan of the series, has gone on record saying that Jonny Quest was one of the influences of his film The Incredibles. The show would also be a subject of affectionate parody, like in the Adult Swim series, The Venture Bros.
Given the quality of Jonny Quest, it's a standard set that's hard to meet up to in the time since.
Johnny's place in cartoon history, in my opinion, is the best animated adventure show ever done.
The 1960s was Hanna-Barbera's golden age. Many of their shows were hits among kids and adults, and their characters became pop culture icons overnight, with more and more cartoons added to the library.
Your hand, Joe, and I shall show you I am as strong as 100 men.
100 men? I'm afraid I can't believe that.
Here goes.
I believe it.
Most notable competition around this time, beef on the likes of Jay Ward animated comedies like the iconic Rocky and Bullwinkle, to the primetime and Saturday morning fare from Format Films, Grand Trey Lawrence Animation, and Hal Singer Productions. Interestingly enough, the biggest animation giant, Walt Disney, was one of the few not interested in pursuing TV animation due to its low quality. After all, Walt was more preoccupied with his theme parks, TV shows, and feature films. The studio also experimented with live-action animated fare like the Emmy-winning special Jack and the Beanstalk, starring and directed by Gene Kelly, even theatrical films based on their properties, like 1964's Hey There's Yogi Bear, the first animated film based on a television series, and 1966's The Man Called Flintstone, a fun spoof of popular spy movies at the time, notably James Bond. However, not everyone was a fan. The studio was heavily criticized for its use of limited animation, even nicknamed the General Motors of animation. Even Looney Tunes' Merry Melodies legend Chuck Jones dismissed the visual style as illustrated radio. Also in 1966, Hanna-Barbera's partnership with Screen Gems ended when the studio was sold to Taft Broadcasting for $12 million. The sale was delayed several months after Harry Cohn's family filed a lawsuit regarding the sale a few years earlier of its private stock in the company. HB was fully incorporated into Taft Broadcasting in 1968, and the company was focused primarily on Saturday morning cartoons, cutting back on its primetime productions and TV specials. And under Taft, the animation quality dropped lower. Simply put, there were too many shows to make and not enough people or time to do any quality work. Many of the veterans like Mike Maltese, Dan Gordon, Warren Foster, and Tony Benedict will soon be replaced by younger staff without the same level of experience, and by international animation teams with even less experience. According to Tony Benedict, the selling out of the studio was no surprise. We all saw it coming. The influence of advertisers were everywhere. They brought in on the early creation of shows, and Hanna-Barbera shows were just 30-minute commercials. No more funny shows. That's when I departed. Also, Screen Gems still owned the distribution and licensing rights to Hanna-Barbera's previous properties under 7-year contracts, and Taft couldn't touch the big moneymakers like Yogi Bear and the Flintstones until the early 70s, which is where we got stuff like Yogi's Gang and a new Fred and Barney show. The success of Jonny Quest, however, led to Hanna-Barbera making more action cartoons, all of them from the mind of comic book legend Alex Toth. Shows like the Herculoids, Birdman and the Galaxy Trio, the Fantastic Four, Dino Boy in the Lost Valley, and perhaps his most famous creation, Space Ghost. These shows were huge hits on the Saturday morning lineup, which received an outstanding 60% share in the ratings. 6 of the 10 Saturday morning slots on CBS during the 1967 season were filled by superhero series from Hanna-Barbera. Though these action cartoons were a hit with audiences, many parent groups thought the violence of the cartoons, as well as comics, was a bad influence on children. We'll get back to them, which led to them being replaced by lighter fare, such as the Banana Splits and Wacky Races. The Banana Splits, who were originally called the Banana Bunch, were presented to Hanna-Barbera by the Leo Burnett Agency, in which Kellogg's was to sponsor an entire weekly hour of programming to NBC. However, they needed content. Hanna-Barbera approached them with something different. They made a show with their trademark funny talking animals, except this time instead of being animated, they'd be live-action costume characters with real people in the suits, which confused the network and Leo Burnett when they showed the concept art, courtesy of Jerry Eisenberg and Ibo Takamoto, and told it would be live-action and not animated. HB went on to pitch the show to Kellogg's, but Joe Barbera had an idea. He was going to pitch to them with a costume character in the room. Luckily, the studio had a Yogi Bear costume used for promotional appearances, and Kellogg's were already familiar with Yogi since they sponsored the Yogi Bear show. The night before the pitch, Joe had the Yogi Bear costume quickly flown from California to Chicago, arriving just 6 hours before the meeting. As Joe Barbera was describing the Banana Splits, the Kellogg's chairman was falling asleep during the actual pitch portion of the presentation. But as soon as the costume Yogi Bear walked into the room, worn by Jerry Eisenberg, it instantly caught everyone's attention. Jerry, as Yogi pranced in the room, shaking hands, patting the execs on the head, putting his arm around them and sitting on their laps. The executives were thrilled, and they helped them sell the show. William Hanna and Joseph Barbera approached puppeteer sibling duo Sid and Marty Krofft to make the costumes for the 4 main characters.
Joe Barbera called me one day and asked me, if we knew we had people in suits, and we did this.
And so that's when we built the banana splits, when after we built them, Marty looked at me and said, "Oh my God, you know, they're going to make a fortune. Why did we do that?"
They had the concept with Kellogg's of the banana splits. They came to us. You know, we added a bunch of creativity to the thing, but it was theirs.
Sid and Marty themselves would later become a driving force in children's entertainment, creating many hit kids shows of the 70s, such as Land of the Lost, The Bugaloos, Wonderbug, Sigma and the Sea Monsters, and H.R. Puffin Stuff. The live-action segments of the Banana Splits featured a band of 4 animals: Fleagle, a dog performed by Jeff Winkles and voiced by Paul Winchell; Bingo, a gorilla performed by Terrence Winkles and voiced by Dawes Butler; Drooper, a lion voiced by Ann Rithrow and voiced by Alan Melvin; and Snorky, a mute elephant who communicates by honking, performed by James Dove and Robert Towns and voiced by Don Messick. The segments drew much of its inspiration from Roland Martin's Laughing, right down to the rapid-fire comedic timing and sight gags. The show also drew inspiration from the then-popular monkey sitcom, Hey Hey, It's the Monkeys. The outdoor scenes were shot on location on Six Flags over Texas at Arlington, Texas. The characters would drive around in their banana buggies, modified Epicat vehicles, which were thought out by Joe Barbera after seeing it demonstrated on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Other segments include Danger Island, a live-action series reminiscent of Jonny Quest, directed by the late Richard Donner, who would go on to direct films such as Superman, Goonies, and a Lethal Weapon series. There were also animated segments, featuring obscure cartoons such as The Three Musketeers and Arabian Nights. The show was a hit for NBC and had a good life of syndication. Many attempts at reviving the splits were rather short-lived. One notable comeback was its direct-to-video horror film by Sci-Fi. If you want to know my thoughts, it stinks. The show's iconic theme song, the Tra-La-La song, was written by Kellogg's jingle writer M.B. Winkles Jr., who also wrote the Snap Crackle Pop theme for Rice Krispie cereal, and has become more popular than the show itself, appearing in many top TV theme songs lists, covered by many artists, and peaked at number 96 on a Billboard Top 100. You might even hear it in the movie Kick-Ass. Wacky Races would be a return to the broad, zany, cartoony humor. It featured 11 racers racing against each other all around the world. While all these races were memorable, such as Penelope Pitstop, Pat Pending, and the Gruesome Twosome, the ones that steal the show are, of course, Dick Dastardly and Muttley, the main villains who try to cheat their way to the top, only to have their plans backfire, reminiscent of the antics of Wile E. Coyote. The show mainly took inspiration from the 1965 film The Great Race, and was originally supposed to be a part of a larger show made by Heather Quigley Productions, who also did Hollywood Squares.
First thing that I remember hearing about was the fact that we were to create all of these characters with their cars. Then each week they would be involved in a race.
It was going to be more of a game where you had to send in who you thought was going to win the race every week or something like that.
And then there would be prizes given away for kids that would pick the winner. It was more of a game show than anything else. And of course, I think the powers that be stepped in and said, you can't do that. So anyway, it just became the show that it eventually evolved into.
The show lasted for 17 episodes, but was successful in ratings. Penelope Pitstop and Dastardly and Muttley became breakout characters, and each got their own spin-off show. A season or two later, Hanna-Barbera would do variations of this concept and later shows, such as 1977's Laugh Olympics, 1985's Yogi's Treasure Hunt, and 1990's Fender Bender 500, both having Dastardly and Muttley as the show's villains. In 2006, a pilot was pitched to Cartoon Network for a Wacky Races revival, featuring the kids of Penelope Pitstop and Peter Perfect, as well as Dastardly and Muttley back to their old tricks. The show was not successful, but in 2017, a reboot series aired on the Boomerang streaming services for 2 seasons. Going back to what I said about the parent groups, the now defunct Action for Children's Television was protesting to what they perceived as too much commercialism and violence in children's television. Their initial focus was the TV series Romper Room, which sold toy products to viewers. Then the next target was the Hanna-Barbera action cartoons, Space Ghost, Frankenstein Jr., and the Herculoids, which were all canceled by 1969 due to pressure from paired watch groups. Even reruns like Jonny Quest and the Tom and Jerry shorts were heavily edited. This of course meant bad news for CBS executive Fred Silverman, who needed a new show fast, one that could keep his Saturday morning schedule steady and to satisfy the angry parent watch groups. He contacted William Hanna and Joseph Barbera about creating said show. What was it? Well, join me in the next video.
Oh, but what fun to wet your whistle and whistle your way back home. You get a tingling feeling